Hello and welcome to Reasoned UK with me, Darren Grimes. This is a channel that asks you to think more and follow less, so do consider hitting that little subscribe button and the notification bell to make sure that you don't miss out on any of our original content full of free thought and ideas. You won't want to miss out. Today's show is no exception. Joining me to discuss all things George Floyd, police brutality, and how America can bring an end to the riots that some have described as a civil war is Brandon Tatum. Now, Brandon is a former police officer in the US state of Arizona. But anyway, you don't want to hear from me. Enough from me. Let's roll the tape and get him on. Brandon Tatum, hi, how are you?
I'm doing well.
Now, how's life in Arizona? Is it a bit crazy at the moment, or is Arizona pretty unscathed?
Well, because Arizona is more of a red state and more of a Republican conservative state, so it's not as crazy. But I guess the worst thing that I'm dealing with right now in Arizona is that it's 115 degrees outside.
Wow, okay. Yeah, it's raining here, so... Now, could you, for our UK audience, just sort of sum up who you are, what you're about, and how you've ended up being the sort of go-to guy when it comes to, you know, a former police officer on the right?
Yeah, I think that obviously God had a tremendous hand in my life. You know, I grew up with my parents separated, and I guess I could say from a legacy of uneducation and different things that God has obviously changed in my life. You know, my mom and dad didn't even know their fathers. And so with that idea in mind, people probably would perceive that I wouldn't be where I'm at today. I did have a few run-ins when I was young. 8 years old, I got arrested for smoking marijuana in a vacant house. I got suspended from school a few times when I was younger. And my father, and this is why it's so important for fathers to be in their young sons' lives, and children in general, but especially their young boys, is that my father had a sit-down conversation with me about getting in trouble and making the right decisions, about having integrity and different things like that. And it really set me on a path to be successful. I got into sports. I ended up being an All-American football player in high school and football, obviously American football.
Yeah.
And then I went to college, played football in college. I was in the NFL draft. I didn't get drafted in the NFL like I'd hope. And then, you know, I just decided I need to have a career, a job. I couldn't keep chasing the football dream. And I have to go back just a little bit. When I was in college, I got saved. I became a Christian. And then moving forward, I needed a job. I looked into the police department. Never thought about being a cop before in my life, never even considered it, but it was a job that was available, had benefits. So I said, man, what the heck, I'm gonna put in my application. And then I went to do a ride along. And a ride along is when you can literally ride with a police officer for a day and kind of see what they do on a day-to-day basis, go to the calls that they go to, see all the crazy stuff that they get a chance to go to and serve. And it blew my mind when I did the ride along. I'd never in my life saw what I perceive as a hero until I saw a police officer in action doing the job on a day-to-day basis. So then I said, you know what? I want to become a police officer. And I became a police officer. I did everything on the police department. I was on a special weapons and tactics team, the SWAT team. I taught new officers. I was a spokesperson for the police department. And then later in my career, I started to wake up to politics. You know, I was on the left-leaning side. I was a Democrat, and I started realizing that the Democratic platform really didn't match what I believed in. I'm a Christian. I believe in small government. I don't like to pay taxes. You know, I don't. None of that stuff appeals to me. And some of my conservative friends would just hammer me every day, like, "Bro, are you sure? Are you sure?" Then Barack Obama came out against police officers. And that was the end for me. I said I could never support a politician that won't support the men and women who wear the uniform and serve on a day-to-day basis. And I decided to look at the Republican side.
Why did you leave the force then?
Yeah, it was just it kind of was an experiment that I never got away from. So about, let's see, 6.5 years on the department, I made a video about the experience that I had at Donald Trump's rally. and that video went viral. That was the first video I ever made on my Facebook account, and it went viral, millions of views, and so I started to realize that. And I've always been a talkative person. I have always been an outspoken person, opinionated. And after that video of Donald Trump's rally, I said, you know what, maybe I should just keep talking and speaking because people want to hear my opinions on things. I made a video about Colin Kaepernick probably a year later. I made a video about Colin Kaepernick, a couple other videos, they all went viral. But a year later, I made a video about Colin Kaepernick taking a knee during the national anthem, which I completely disagree with what he did. That video had 70 million views.
Wow.
So then at that point, people were reaching out to me to see if I wanted to get into the media realm. There was a media organization in Anthem, Arizona, and they gave me an offer I really couldn't refuse. They said, hey, let's do it for a year. If you don't like it, you can go back to being a police officer. In the state of Arizona, when you're a police officer, even if you're not active, you're still certified for at least 3 years before your certification lapse. So I said, let me try it. But I never went back. I did
that
that.
Lapsed now?
Yeah, I think it just lapsed recently.
Lapsed. Right.
So I would have to go back to the academy and do it all over again if I wanted to go back to policing.
Brandon, if we turn to the serious matter of George Floyd. Now, obviously what happened to him was completely unconscionable, and his family obviously deserve justice as well. But was former Vice President Joe Biden right when he asserted that his death is not an isolated incident, but part of an ingrained systemic cycle of injustice? In your opinion, does the actual data not contradict that statement?
Yeah, I think people need to realize this. Joe Biden is a politician. And politicians have a vested interest in pursuing a certain idea so that they can win an election. So Joe Biden, nothing that he says even has to make sense in the realm of politics according to, their ideology. The numbers do not match at all whatsoever of a systemic issue with police and police brutality. I have never seen a black man with an officer's knee on his neck and him lose his life. I've never seen it. This is the first time that I've seen an officer do something of this nature. So just in the basic principle of what we've seen on television, and nobody can reproduce that's an isolated incident. Black people in America are not hunted down by police officers. If you look at the stats, white Americans are killed twice as much as black Americans by police officers. And also they're killed 2 and 3 times more than black people are when you look at individuals who are unarmed. So, and here's the pushback that people normally give, and I'm gonna give the synopsis for it so people won't be confused. People often say, well, there's more white people in America than black people. Well, that statement is true, but police don't patrol everybody in the United States of America. They only patrol the criminal element. They only respond to calls for service and crimes that are being committed. African Americans in this country and in America, they commit half of the murders in this country and over half of the violent crimes in this country. So they're perpetuating a disproportionate amount of crimes, which leads to police officers patrolling them in a disproportionate manner. So black people are patrolled a tremendous amount more than whites, yet they get killed less than whites. So when you look at the numbers in its totality, what they're saying about systemic issues in the black community is just not true.
Mm-hmm. But if we look at the stat, African Americans make up 13% of the country's population, but 23% of victims of police shootings. 1 in 100 African Americans are currently in jail, compared with 1 in 500 white Americans. Is there really no issue?
Yeah, it's not necessarily an issue with the police. It's an issue with culture. It's an issue with people not holding themselves accountable, because you can look at all kind of numbers in the black community. Black people commit or are involved in more abortions than any other race. Black people vote for one party at 95%. That's the only race in America that votes one side. When you look at black people committing crimes, now blacks make up 13% of the population, yet the people who are committing the most crimes tend to be black males between 16 and 35 to 40. That's about 6 or 5% of the black population, or the total population in general. So you have about 5% of the total population in the United States of America committing half of the murders in this country and over half of the violent crimes. So yeah, that makes sense why black people are overrepresented in the prison system, and it makes sense why police are involved with black Americans, and why there's uses of force that happen in black America at a disproportionate rate. So it's not just that the officers are bad, the justice system, it's that there's cultural, social, economic issues in the black community that leads down the path of having more crimes committed and having more interactions, sometimes negative interactions with police.
Brandon, do you think Democrats can take the political high ground over this? Because for decades, right, they've run the vast majority of the cities that are experiencing the most killings by police and crime is most rife, right?
Yeah, they will not take a political high ground. A political high ground would be for them to come together with the Republicans and say, how do we actually fix this problem? But they're not doing that because they want to win elections. So they need to push fear and they need to push false rhetoric in order for them to have the solution to the problem so that people will vote for them. They have been perpetuating the issues. The murder capital of this country is Baltimore, Maryland. And Baltimore, Maryland is run by Democrats. Chicago, Illinois, which have the highest number of murders of black people in this country, is run by Democrats. St. Louis, Missouri, which is the murder capital of this country per capita, which means they have the most murder based on the population, they are also run by Democrats. So when you look at the Democrat-run cities around the country, California, New York, you go all over the spectrum, black people are struggling. And the Democrats have a vested interest in keeping that struggle going, keeping that fear going. So then when election time comes, they can say, you know what, we're going to fix it this time. Joe Biden's number one principle is that he's going to be better than President Trump. And Joe Biden has been in office for, 30 years and has done nothing. Mm-hmm. So they have a vested interest in doing this. And that's why I don't necessarily listen to politicians when I want to get solutions.
Yeah. I mean, if we hear a lot of, especially at the minute, a lot of criticisms of President Trump. But if we look at both, what I really don't understand, and forgive me if this is an ignorant question from a perspective of someone in the United Kingdom, but if we look at both Presidents Clinton and Obama, both of their approval ratings from, as far as African Americans are concerned, is incredibly high. But why did neither of them tackle these issues? We keep hearing that for decades. These injustices, these racial injustices, have been prevalent within American society for decades and decades and decades. Why have they not dealt with this? Why did they not deal with it if it was such a prevalent and obvious issue? And is it fair to label responsibility for these structural issues on President Trump?
Right. So it's a psychological brainwashing that has been going on in the black community by Democrats. Because like you said, black people are the only ones that vote at 95% one way, which is the Democrat way. You look at Bill Clinton, you look at Joe Biden, they authored the 94 crime bill, which disproportionately affected African Americans, sending them to prison. President Trump has reversed the effects of the 94 crime bill by giving relief to people on the federal level. Ted Cruz, the governors in Florida and Georgia have all implemented similar, even before the federal government did this, similar policies that turn away the policies of these Democrats who really hurt African Americans. But when you look at the Democrats, and I say this till I'm blue in the face, they have no reason to fix the problem, because if the problem is fixed, then nobody needs to vote for them anymore. And when you look at President Trump has done a tremendous amount of actual work in the black community. You talk about the First Step Act, which is the first step of many helping with federal prison reform. My uncle, who got 40 years federal time, is now going to do 15 years federal time for drug offense because of the First Step Act, because of the federal changes that President Trump has implemented. He's given more money to historically black colleges than any of those Democratic presidents. Period. He's created this opportunity zone where there's an estimate, economists estimate that there'll be $100 billion of investment into these inner city areas, into these opportunity zones. I mean, I've been to the White House 5 times. He's had pastors. He's had HBCU presidents. HBCU is the historically black college presidents, all of them at the White House to talk. He's prayed in the White House. President Trump has done so much for the black community, yet the Democrats still keep them in fear so that they won't vote for President Trump. It's sad, but I believe things are changing.
Well, speaking of change then, how do you think the African-American vote will actually be split in the upcoming election?
I mean, I wish I knew all the numbers and I could be 100% guaranteed, but I think he's going to get at least 20 to 30% of the black vote. And people may not understand that. They may not see it coming because they listen to the mainstream media. They watch all these celebrities come out and say President Trump is a racist. But I know a lot of African-American people who they are just tired of the liberals. They're tired of what's going on with COVID. They're tired of what's going on with this Black Lives Matter stuff. They're tired of politicians promising them stuff and never delivering on anything. I mean, you could even see on the Breakfast Club, the interview on the Breakfast Club with Charlamagne the God and Joe Biden, when he said, if you don't know if you want to vote for me or President Trump, then you ain't black. I mean, black people around the country can see how these politicians really feel. So I think that about 20 to 30% of the black vote, which would be tremendously surprising to a lot of people. But I think that's the trend that's coming. And I'll say this, the black vote will change to Republican after President Trump. And it's because they have done such a good job at smearing President Trump. But if another candidate comes along that people can perceive as less divisive, maybe a minority candidate that they can't use the racist, white supremacist ideology on, I think that's when more people will switch.
Now, if I just summarize again for a British audience, how it's been in the States, if we look at a couple of examples, in Minneapolis where George Floyd was killed, a black entrepreneur had his bar destroyed before he'd even had a chance to open its doors for the first time. In Richmond, Virginia, the mob set fire to a building, then blocked firefighters who were trying to save a child from the flames. Thankfully, by the way, the child survived. Now, this can be seen in cities all across America, can't it? And I wonder what your take is on just how harmful this is, because some are saying that this is, America in a state of civil war. Rioters are destroying private property and putting innocent lives at risk, and clearly diverting attention away from legitimate grievances of peaceful protest. I mean, one, do you think there are legitimate grievances? And two, what do you think, just what the hell is going on in America?
Yeah, man, I could say the crescendo of political correctness clashing with ignorant people. This is not about justice. I mean, anybody can see that this is not about justice. George Floyd was killed by that police officer. That police officer was fired the day that video came out, which was the next day after the incident, I believe. And he also have gotten charged. All of the officers have gotten charged, and they're still protesting. They're still burning stuff. They're still, and let me tell you this. If they really cared about black lives and this was a concern of a systemic issue, this was a concern of black people being viewed differently in America, then why would you burn down black businesses? Why would you kill other black people? There have been 6 black people or so that have gotten their lives taken in the rallies and protests around the country. So you're fighting for one man who lost his life. You've gotten justice, but you kill 6 other black people in the process. So these individuals are looking for opportunities to steal, to loot, to burn monuments, and do all of the things that they could not do when police are acting out law and order. And so cowardice, police chief and leaders in most of these liberal states want the police officers to back off and let these people to completely destroy the city. And in my personal opinion, this is no different than the COVID-19 situation we were dealing with that completely ruined the economy. They want that to hurt President Trump. So now these Democratic leaders move back, let people destroy businesses. So even after COVID is over, businesses still haven't recovered because they're destroyed and burned down. And to me, it's an underlying plot in order to keep chaos and confusion going during an election season. Because every election season, you see this stuff happening. It did not happen last year. It did not happen the year before. But 2016, you saw the same mess. 2015, 2016, you see the same mess. So it's a political jump. And let me talk about the grievances. There are legitimate grievances here. People do legitimately grieve. But the problem is they're mixing legitimate grievances with just things that they do not like to see police officers do. There are officers who are justifiably using force against individuals And people don't like it, and then they lump it with officers who are actually killing people for no reason.
Now, I'm seeing calls for reforms of qualified immunity to rein in police forces in the States. Could you explain what this is and what your view on that is?
Well, I think it's rooted in foolishness, right? They want to defund the police department. They want to get rid of unions, and these are not the problems, right? If you really look at the George Floyd situation, and you're a fair person and you evaluate it on both sides, you say, what did the police officer do wrong? I feel like he did everything right until he kept his knee on George Floyd's neck for that amount of time. Is it clear that that's the cause of George Floyd's death? I'm not sure. We have an autopsy that says that it isn't. We have an autopsy that says that it is. But regardless, as a former police officer, that did not look right. And I don't think that that was a good act by a police officer and could have caused that man's death. Now, what did George Floyd do that he could have done better? Well, maybe if he wasn't trying to pay for stuff with a fraudulent $20 bill, if he had not been using methamphetamine and fentanyl, which he had enough fentanyl and meth in his body that would have killed him alone. Then he had no business resisting arrest from a police officer after they had arrested him, and he wouldn't be under the knee of a police officer. So it's not just police reform that's going to stop these things from happening. It's accountability on both sides. Black people who are not doing anything wrong, upstanding citizens, not committing crimes, will never be in the position that George Floyd was in. It's only people who are committing crimes, who are violent against the police, who are doing things that they shouldn't be doing, and they end up in one of two situations. They end up in a situation where they encounter a bad cop who kills them for no reason, or they encounter a good cop who used reasonable and necessary force against them that may lead to their death.
So you don't think there was a racist motive behind that at all?
No, I don't have any evidence to prove that it's a racist motive. Just because the cop is white and the suspect or the victim is black, that there's no indication that it's racist. You know, a friend of mine brought up a really good point. He said, why don't people complain about racism when interracial couples divorce, right? If a white wife divorces a black husband, why aren't people saying, oh, it's because of racism? It's because the white wife don't like the husband. The foolishness of not having any evidence to back that claim is the same foolishness to make a claim of intraracial or interracial conflict being racist all the time. And the funny thing is, you will never hear it the other way around. If a black officer were to kill a white man unjustifiably, which has happened numerous times in our policing in America, they never say that it's racism of the black man against the white man. It's all propaganda and BS, in my personal opinion.
But if you were still on the force in Arizona and you saw a colleague, a member of the force in your team do that to someone, put their knee on someone's neck for an extended period of time, would you not be like, whoa, dude, this is not okay?
Well, yeah, well, for me, we don't have a policy where you can put your knee on somebody's neck. It's completely prohibited. Yeah. So our training is that you put your knee on the backside of somebody's shoulder. Some people think it's the neck, but it's not. It's the upper shoulder. You do that for leverage. You don't do that to strangulate people. You don't do that unless it's life or death and you got to do something crazy. But that's not a policy. So if I saw a man with his knee on somebody's neck, I will correct that officer, because you know why? I don't want him to kill the guy. I don't want him to be perceived as doing anything wrong. I don't want him to lose his job, and I don't want us all to lose our job. For what? Because he made a mistake and put his knee in the wrong spot. So I would address that officer, but I can't say that that's the consistent approach that should have happened in this situation, given the fact that when you do research, that it was their policy that if you're a certified police officer on that agency and you were certified to use that maneuver, you can actually put your knee on somebody's neck. So I don't think it's bizarre, given that that was a policy on the department, that other officers watching that wouldn't jump on it and say, get your knee off his neck. I'm not saying that it's right. I'm just saying that it's not as obvious as it would be of me patrolling in the state of Arizona.
But do you think that policy needs to go?
No, I don't think the policy needs to go. I just think that it needs to be properly applied because clearly having your knee on somebody's neck is not necessarily going to kill them. Let me give you an example. If George Floyd didn't have underlying heart conditions, if he wasn't strung out literally to death on methamphetamine and fentanyl, if he wasn't in distress by resisting arrest for 10 minutes, he wouldn't be in a position where that maneuver would have killed him. Because clearly, I have never seen any complaints of that maneuver in the history of policing. And people have not died from that maneuver, not that I know of, until I seen George Floyd. So I don't think the maneuver is wrong. I think the application of it needs to be appropriate. So if the gentleman is having a medical complication, you probably shouldn't utilize that level of use of force because it can contribute to his death, even if it's not directly contributing to his death.
Now, on police unions, you did mention them briefly. Is America currently unable to fire bad cops because of the power of powerful trade unions? Do you think there's a problem there?
I personally don't. I mean, I don't know the structure of police unions and other departments, but in no way, form, or fashion was the police union that I was a part of, that I paid dues to, will somehow prevent you from getting fired. The thing is it's kind of like defense attorneys. And I don't know the structure in the UK, but the defense attorneys in the United States of America, they are responsible for defending people who get accused of crimes. So the police union is the same way. Like, they have to defend their officers in ways that are applicable. Like, so if an officer shoots somebody unjustifiably, the police union is going to defend them where defense is necessary, which means that they're going to make sure that the police officer gets due process. They're going to make sure that there was actual violation of policies that resulted in that officer getting fired. They're just there to reassure that the officer has their rights. You know, when you get into a police involved shooting in the state of Arizona, you are presumed a criminal to a certain degree. They take your gun away and they interview you and read you your constitutional rights, and then they question you. So what typically will have is a union rep will come and represent you and stand by you and make sure that they don't block you into doing something incriminating, that they don't ask you questions that they're not allowed to ask you. It's simply like having an attorney for you. They can't get you out of legal trouble. Mm-hmm. You know, if you didn't kill somebody for no reason, the union can't all of a sudden come out and say, you know what, he didn't actually kill that person for no reason. So I don't know what other unions do, but from my experience and exposure to police unions, there's no way in the world that the police union is the problem.
Do you think there's a certain, if we go back to the protests, do you think there's a certain hypocrisy in them? If we look at them, they've been here in London as well, and around the world. You know, it really has been quite a global movement. But do you think there's a certain element of hypocrisy around this? Because, you know, why is it always the US? Why is it always Trump? Because we had police brutality in France, on the streets of Paris consistently. There have been people that have had their eyes put out because of really quite aggressive police brutality. In Hong Kong, we see what China is doing to the students that were protesting over there, and yet still there isn't these massive protest movements against the police brutality in these cases. It only seems to be about President Trump. It only seems to be about the United States of America.
Yeah, it's all political, brother. It's all political. You know, there's a tremendous amount of hypocrisy in this stuff. And the reason why I say that is because if you look at the deaths, right, in Minnesota in 2019, there was one black man killed unarmed by the police department. And just because you're unarmed don't mean that you are innocent. You can still be a deadly threat to police even if you're unarmed. If you try to take a police officer's gun, if you're beating a police officer to death, they can use deadly force against you. So for the sake of argument, just say that was a bad shooting. That's one shooting in Minnesota alone. Last year in the United States of America, out of 44 million black people, there were 9 black people who were killed unarmed by the police department. Now you juxtapose that or you compare that to the killings of black people in inner city violence. In one weekend alone, in one city in the United States of America, in one state, you have a weekend where they have had 82 shootings and 14 to 19 black people murdered, including women and children, in one weekend. That's 3 days. You have more people dying in one city than 365 days of the year. Let me put this in perspective as well. They are protesting the death of George Floyd, yet the protests around the country have killed more black people than the Minnesota Police Department. So it is tremendously hypocritical what these individuals are doing. And I believe it's all driven by politics. And what happens in America rolls downhill in other countries, and people feel emboldened to come out in this left-leaning liberal perspective that's rooted in a bunch of lies.
Now, there's also a bit of hypocrisy, isn't there, over the social gatherings, because we've been told, especially in various states, that social distancing has to be applied, and we're told that these gatherings are potentially infectious, but that seems to go out of the window if the governor in question likes your politics, right?
Right. I mean, just George Floyd's funeral. I mean, they wouldn't let people go to church in the United States. They said it's forbidden. These gatherings are forbidden. I mean, people have been fighting to, and President Trump obviously made a huge declaration to say, you governors better let people go back to church or else, which I think is very appropriate, because church assembly is covered in the Constitution of the United States of America. That's not something that any governor can thwart. That's a God-given right. So, but anyway, even some pastors didn't allow people to come to church. They wanted social distancing. And then George Floyd's funeral, there was no social distancing. People were in church, hugging each other, crying on each other, and doing everything under the book. So it's like, and then when you look at the riots, not one politician that I can think of were adamant that people should not be protesting because of the social distancing and the threat of COVID-19 spread. But when people were protesting peacefully to have our country reopened in many states around the country, they were banning people from protesting and saying, if you're not social distancing, you can't protest. But yet and still, when you want to burn down our country because of one man who wasn't really a good man, but he was unjustifiably killed, based on preliminary information that we have, it's totally fine. COVID-19, everybody can die from COVID-19 now because it's politically expedient.
Could you sum up what you'd like to see from the debate now, and how America can bring an end to the riots and actually have a more rational and sensible discourse around some of the more legitimate questions?
It will never happen. I think it will never happen. There is too many people who have a profit margin, too many people who are, their political life is based on division. They will never let this happen. Now, I could tell you how it could happen, but unfortunately, America is like the Titanic, is sinking, and you got to save as many people as you can, but you ain't going to save America, because people will never forgive America for slavery. People just never will do it. Now, in a perfect world, this is how things should happen. The people in the community, the leaders of the community, should sit down with the leaders of the police department in a very peaceful forum to talk about legitimate things that we can do together to save lives and to change this police brutality narrative. And one of those things would be, let's hold people accountable. Let's tell people in the community that they shouldn't be smoking methamphetamine and robbing and stealing and killing and resisting arrest. And then we can go to the police department and say, hey, when you have an officer that's showing aggression, you guys need to discipline that officer, and you need to fire that officer if necessary. It's no more time of having all of this forgiveness for officers who make mistakes. No, you only got a few opportunities to make mistakes, and then you're getting fired. Also, people in the community, come together and join the police department so you can patrol your own communities, so you can do what's right, what you think. You can be a representative of your community. If we have those legitimate conversations, and then add on top of that, if we were to articulate what's actual police brutality versus uses of force that people don't like to see, if we can get all that together, police brutality will be over. At least the rhetoric of police brutality will be over, and people will come together. Now, real quick on the race side, if we were to look at America and be honest and say that white people own slaves, but there was rare to have white people own slaves. You had to be a person that had a lot of money. It was like 2% of white people in America ever owned slaves. Also, black people in America owned slaves. There were hundreds of black people who owned hundreds of black slaves. People need to realize that. And also that black people in America, not every black person was a slave. Slavery was banned and illegal in the North. People did not do that in the North. It was a Southern thing. Same thing with Jim Crow and segregation. It was a segregation in Jim Crow South. Those the Southern states that applied segregation and discrimination against blacks. In the North, that was not the case. So if people understand their history and realize that America has been fighting for change since its inception and has done more than probably any country in the world to mend the problems of racial division, which were inadvertent. It wasn't intentional. Slavery had nothing to do with race. And a lot of these segregation had nothing to do with race. It had more to do with economic power. So when we get that and put that together, people can forgive America for its shortcomings. America can forgive black Americans for their shortcomings. And we can come together as a country and say, let's move forward together from here. Let's all love each other. We're all Americans. We're not black, white, green, orange. We are Americans. And we support our country, we support the flag, and we're going to work together as Americans to make this thing even better for the future generations. If we were to do that, it'll work. It ain't never going to happen, though. I hate to be pessimistic, but it ain't never going to happen.
I think it's a really depressing image that you paint, though, because when I think, if as a Brit, when I think of the United States of America, I think of the land of the free. I think of a land of opportunity, a land where if you work hard, you can achieve some pretty bloody fantastic things. Yet the image that's painted is one where, it's a backwater, where it's rife with racism, and, you'll be punched on the street, and you'll never achieve anything if you're black, etc.
Yeah, think about it. The president was black. The first family was black. The most powerful man in the world was black in the United States of America. All you got to do is look at United States sports. Whenever you see Olympic sports, this is the thing that you notice, right? When you look at the Olympic sport teams that, track and field, I'm going to say just track and field and some of the Olympic games. When you look at a country and you look at the representatives for that country, you can tell kind of what the demographic is, right? You go to China, you see China, they're all Chinese. You go to some of these European, most of them are white. You have some black. So then you have some white and black. So you can tell that there's black people that live in the UK. In America, nearly everybody's black. So every Olympian is black, just about, especially in the sprints and some of the track and field things. They're all black. So it's almost disproportionate representation of black Americans on a national stage when it comes to sports. And you look at it like this. I'm black. I've been black my whole life. There ain't no pervasive racism in this country. It's a lie. And you cannot get anybody on this interview that can say, I've experienced real racism. I wasn't able to get a job because of racism. You can get people saying, I believe I didn't. You can get people saying, well, it's not me, it's somebody else that's experienced racism. But you're never going to get anybody that actually experienced racism for themselves. This is the greatest country on planet Earth, in my personal opinion. You can achieve anything. You can be completely broke, eating out of the trash can. And if you work hard, if you educate yourself, you can become a millionaire. And I have seen it happen in the black community tremendous amount of times. And we can just look at the Asian community in America. Asian people have come over to America, suffered a lot of discrimination. They were even in what we would consider internment camps in the United States of America. Now look at Asian Americans. They are the most wealthy, the most educated out of any subgroup in America. How is that possible if this is a racist, white, brainwashed country? Mm-hmm. That's not the case. Floyd Mayweather, the most wealthy athlete in the world, I believe, in the United States of America. Jay-Z, a rapper, is a billionaire. Him and his wife are both billionaires. I can go down a list of how many black billionaires you have in the United States of America. Collectively, the wealth of the United States of America for the black population would put, if black people in America was a country, they'll be in the top 15 countries in the world economically. How in the world is America racist? And there has not only just been a black president, there's also been black presidential candidates. Ben Carson was one of them. And you can go down in history. Every year you have black candidates. They just don't win. And Barack Obama won 2 terms. Mm-hmm. 2. Not 1, 2. He got reelected. What a racist country we live in. It's crazy to me.
I've got a really good idea. Brandon Tatum for president.
I don't know if I can handle what President Trump been going through, man. Oh my God.
Would you run
He can't do nothing right, man. He can't do nothing right.
Would you stand though for some political office?
I've been thinking about it. It has to be something that's just so compelling to me that I'm willing to give up my, because they're gonna come after me and I'm gonna end up.
But they already do that now, right?
Yeah, but you just imagine if I was a politician. Just imagine if I was a United States senator. Just imagine if I was in a position where I could potentially be the vice president, president, or something like that. I mean, people they have to come after you to stop you. See, right now I'm just a voice on social media. But if I start getting up in the ranks of having political power, like President Trump, before he was the president, everybody loved President Trump. He was one of the most popular people in the world. He is one of the richest men in America. On Forbes magazine, he had his own show. Everybody loved Trump. But when he threatened that political structure, now he's the most racist, crazy person on planet Earth. And the same thing will happen to me is that people love Brandon, former police officer. Let me run for office and people will act a fool. But what I will say, and I've been inspired by President Trump, is if it comes down to it, and I feel that the country needs me to do this, and that my constituency would need me to step up and do this, I'll do it.
Well, one to watch then, one to watch. We'll end it there. Thank you very much for taking some time out to talk to us today.
Thanks, Darren, for having me on, brother.
No problem at all. Reasoned is a grassroots organisation that relies on support from people like yourself who want us to continue producing our free-thinking, high-quality content. You can rest assured whatever you donate, big or small, will be put back into ensuring we win the battle of ideas. Thank you for your support.